Right here where I live? Well, some people wouldn't think it was too special on kind of the smell of the fish factories, but you know when you smell that, it's money being made in the community, and people have jobs. It's down to earth.
Down to earth people.
And,
It's what we are, down to earth people.
It's comfortable. It's a comfortable feeling.
I lived on the Patuxent River. I've lived on the Chesapeake Bay. I've worked them both. And I know what it meant to me. I know what it meant to all of my neighbors and my friends. I loved Brooms Island. It was my home. I felt comfortable there and loved the people there dearly. But because of the condition of the river, it's taken all of that away. That's gone.
By boat, Reedville, Virginia, and Brooms Island, Maryland, are only 60 miles apart. But what separates them is more than the waters of Chesapeake Bay. In Reedville, there's a way of life which comes, as it always has, from the bay. But in Brooms Island, times have changed. The main stem of Chesapeake Bay stretches from north of Baltimore all the way to Norfolk. But the rivers which feed it drain cities and countryside in Maryland, Virginia, Delaware, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York. 15 million people live in the watershed of the bay. But in our numbers, we're changing the bay for all of us.
Reaching out with fingers made of sand, gentle sea lives within the land. Sun on the water puts a gleam in your eye, with ivory sails in a windy sky. We follow you, taking for granted how long can you be, living beside us faithfully, so tried and true.
It's 4 o'clock on a June morning in Reedville, Virginia.
I like to start early, yeah. I can be out there at daybreak, start fishing. Most of the crab houses like me to get in time so they can ship the jimmies out. When the truck's there waiting for them, they want you back in there pretty early.
Reedville is a town that follows the water. Raleigh nut, crabs in the summer, and oysters in the winter. It's a way of life that Raleigh has come to value.
And one good thing, you don't have nobody standing on top of your boss 24 hours a day, working for yourself. If you're sick and you miss a day, there's nobody tell you, say, you fired because you missed Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. You're your own boss. Worked on the Manhattan boats about 9 years. If you don't crab or go on the Manhattan boat, you got to skip town.
Almost everyone in Reedville works with the water, from the watermen to the pilots and captains who find fish for the Manhattan boats.
Jimmy, I see a lot of rips off your starboard.
Captain Ernest Shelton.
Some people call them alewives, some people call them bunker, some people call them Manhattan, all the same fish. If he's showing, you can see him, you better catch him, because 20 minutes later he might not be showing, you won't be able to catch anything.
Shallow and ripped up, shallow, whipping, ripped up, but not a whole lot of color, but it's about third steamer size.
Yeah, it's always a race. It's 11 of us in our company, and it's about 12 in the standard company, and everybody's after the same thing. And
let them go.
it might be one bunch of fish, and 20 boats take off running for it. Well, who was going to be the first one there? Most of the time get some fish.
Bring a little one in. All right. Close them on. Close them up. Bring them on together.
You get a little thrill when you get a net full of fish and you get that old boat loaded. It's a thrill to get that old boat loaded and head to the factory. You know, it makes you feel good.
Well, when I first quit the fish boat, I did work in Washington, D.C. for one summer. But I finally went back home working for myself. I never have left the city. If I have a bad week in the city, in the month I can't pay the rent, you're in trouble. I'm down here on my own home. It's a big difference. Well, you can raise so much food right here. Got your deep freeze, ain't no problem. If Chesapeake Bay dried up on Manhattan and dried up on crabs, it'd be a sad time around through here.
45 pounds. All right, turn them on, Captain Rudolph.
Menhaden's made into cosmetic oil and pet food, but the crabs that Raleigh catches are for people to eat, and Smith's Seafood is one of the busiest places in town. Marie Evans.
How many on the second? I mean the record. 2. Okay. I work for Smith Seafood. I have for about the last 20 years, really. Right now, I mostly pack the back fin. That's the lump. That's the most expensive part of the crab. They take the crab and they pick it. They separate the lump and the regular crab. So then we go through it once it's weighed and everything. We go through it and see if they've left any shell or any particles. After you once get the hang of it, the most important thing is not to break it up too much because when people buy lump meat, they want lump meat. So you'll miss 4th of July on that? Our best pickers can pick over $200, $300 a week. Not anything else around in this community will pay like that.
Frame out.
Most everybody that lives around this area, some sort of way, depends on the Chesapeake Bay and what comes out of the bay for a living. Without the Chesapeake Bay, Reedville would become a dead community.
Over the horizon, to the north, the Patuxent River joins the main bay. A few miles upriver is the town of Brooms Island. Brooms Island is a little closer to the big cities and a little farther up the watershed than Reedville. But the bay looks pretty much the same here. In Brooms Island, you'll find a town that still follows the water, but just barely. Bernie Fowler used to run a business here.
When the hard heads was really running, it got so that I didn't have enough boats. My good friend round the corner, Miss Sadie Elliott, she didn't have enough boats, nor did the other several places on the island. And you could rent anything. You could rent a washing tub if it would float.
The boat rental place is still called Bernie's, but everything else seems to have changed.
The crabs were so abundant, our family would catch as many as 50 dozen soft-shell crabs in one day. When the rockfish would play, it was almost like a thunderstorm. They'd churn the water up. Hard-shell crabs, the buy boats that used to purchase the crabs, limit the trot liners to 10 sugar barrels of crabs per day. Sounds almost unbelievable. And yet, it is the truth. It's factual. And this has all happened within 50 years.
I think the people are beginning to realize how valuable the water is. Around Easter time, we always went on Easter Saturday and caught a rockfish. Always. But I don't believe we can do that now.
Boots Connor also remembers better days, but he's still fishing his pound net just upstream of the island.
I wouldn't advise a young man to take up commercial fishing on the Patuxent River, because I don't think he can make a living at it. There ain't much to it, I tell you. Not today. No. Every little bit helps. You can always catch a few fish. I would say you can catch a few fish 365 days a year. Enough to eat, enough to fill your stomach. But that's not paying for your equipment. It'll cost us $15 a day before we even move the boat. And you go up the river and you catch $10 worth of fish, and you're so hot. Back when I was fishing with my father, we used to be able to go out and catch as many fish as you want. Now you can't find a hardhead in the river. Oysters are the same way. It used to be here. You could go out on the oyster rocks, and you could walk from boat to boat. Now you find 2 or 3 boats out over there. They may come in with 4 or 5 bushel, where he was coming in 25, 30 bushel. And it just goes on and on, from one thing to the other.
Back on Brooms Island, the oyster house is still packing Patuxent brand oysters, but hardly any of them come from the Patuxent. Most are trucked in from other parts of the bay.
Pier 1 wants 6 gallons of select.
Fern Connor helps to run the business her father started almost 40 years ago.
Also, Betty called, and there's 2 quarts now instead of 1. At one time, Patuxent River oysters were considered the best oysters in the state of Maryland. And at the moment, there's not enough in the Patuxent River for any oysterman to make a living.
1945 when I started working out, 15 years old then. First time I ever made $8 a day in my life. My mother wouldn't even make that kind of money then herself.
Elijah Sewell was born on the Patuxent. He's worked at the oyster house almost 40 years.
We had 125 shuckers here then. And boats used coming here from New Jersey, boats coming here from Virginia, and different places. Bring high 500, 600, and 700 boots at a time. Some bring up to 1,000 boots at a time in here then.
So it would be packed to the ceiling. You would have to find your way around the piles of shell oysters. And they have their own smell, which some people turn their nose up at, but to us it smelled good because it was productivity.
1, 3, $4 even on 12.
It was a tiresome but a happy time when you were able to fill your orders, and at the end you say, I filled them all and they're all out. The trucks are gone and it's done. You know, you relax, tired but happy. Today when you can't fill your orders, it's not happy at all. It's very frustrating.
In a couple of years, I don't think we know anything to do.
The Patuxent was a beautiful, beautiful river and quite productive. And to see it in the condition it is now is, I just don't like to think about it. It makes me very unhappy.
Why should people like these, living on the same bay as the people of Reedville, find their way of life in jeopardy, their future in question? The mystery is in the water itself. And to find clues, we must retrace its journey back upstream. As Brooms Island has been declining, the communities upriver, like many in the Bay watershed, have been booming. Marilyn Reeves lives up here, not far from the river. Like the folks downstream, she's seen changes over the years.
This little Patuxent River is located right between the metropolitan areas of Baltimore and Washington. And we squeeze it. We squeeze it because we need more housing from both directions, and they push out farther. And the more houses that you have, the more shopping centers you have, the more pavement you have, you change the characteristic of your runoff, you create more sewage. We all fertilize our front lawns out here. We want them green. Oh, it's so nice to have a nice green lawn. Well, you know, we put too much fertilizer on. And the farmers do the same thing. And we waste a lot. And so the rain comes, and it sweeps it into the streets, and it sweeps it into the gutter, and it sweeps it into the river. And there in the river, then, we start seeing the problems.
Up here, the Chesapeake Bay seems far away. But these communities are just as much a part of the bay as Reedville or Brooms Island, because the fresh water that feeds the bay runs off the land. And what we do on land affects the bay. Just upriver from Brooms Island, Dr. Michael Hirschfield is taking a close look at the water in the Patuxent.
Where are we going first? Kings Point? Yeah. The two main problems with the Patuxent River are nutrient runoff from farms and sewage treatment plants, and the sediments that are washing in from, mostly from farms or from construction activities in the upstream counties. The end result of too much nutrients by the time you've gone through all of the sections of the food chain is the low dissolved oxygen that you see in this part of the river, and that means no crabs and no fish.
Ready? Surface. Okay, surface. Temperature is 29.3. 6 meters.
Everything from the algae on up to the fish require oxygen in their water to live, just like we require it in the air. And this part of the river is a very critical area where many times the dissolved oxygen levels in the water will be so low as not to support life.
The whole area, this whole area is bad for fish.
The Patuxent River and the Chesapeake Bay, like any body of water, contain algae. When they die, the process of decomposition uses up the oxygen in the water. The problem is that in the Patuxent River and in the Chesapeake Bay, because of all the nutrients, we have tremendous populations of algae. When these tremendously large populations of algae die, they use up almost all of the available oxygen in the water. And when the oxygen's used up, you have nothing left in the river for the crabs and the fish to live with.
It's a system overloaded. Too much nutrient comes into the bay. From sewage treatment plants, in fertilizers carried by runoff from our farms and suburban lawns. And the land sends something else to the bay, soil. The bay has a very busy watershed. Each year leaves fewer acres of undisturbed land. When it rains, too much of the land is carried to the bay. This murky water has profound effects on aquatic life downstream.
Okay, that's it. Next station, George. One thing that many people don't realize is that the Chesapeake Bay and the Patuxent River once had large areas that were covered by what we call submerged aquatic vegetation. What was important about this vegetation is that it served as a primary nursery area for juvenile fish and shellfish. Now, because the water is so murky, the submerged aquatic vegetation simply can't get enough light to survive, and it's disappeared from most of the areas of the bay and essentially from all of the Patuxent River.
Okay, Mike, the second depth is 2.5 feet.
Everybody that lives upstream is responsible in one way or another. We produce sewage. We have lawns that we like to have look nice and green. The reason that things aren't the way they were 25, 30 years ago in this part of the river is because things upstream aren't the way they were 25, 30 years ago.
There's an old saying about canaries in a mine shaft, that if you take the canary down the mine shaft, the canary will keel over dead when you get gases in there and the miners get out because they're next. The Patuxent, to me, is our canary for the Chesapeake Bay. It's only 110 miles long. It's right here. It's ours. If we can't ensure the future productivity of the Patuxent River, I have no hope for ensuring the future productivity of the Chesapeake Bay.
I'll miss when I leave from down here. So like every morning, I know just where I'm going to and work about 12, 1 o'clock and back home. Fool around till the next morning, do the same thing over and over. As you want to get doing the same thing over and over, you look for it. Get used to it. And that's trouble now. I'm got used to fooling around down here. But I can get back running heavy equipment though. It won't take long to do it.
See you all Monday.
See you Monday.
Have a good day.
We are destroying a resource, and it could be irreversible, that brings in the economy of this region millions and millions of dollars, and is of great comfort to us to know that we can go out into the down part of the Patuxent River and go fishing, go swimming. I want to be able to go swimming in that part of the river without thinking, oh, are there diseases in this river? Are there viruses? Would this make me sick? I want to be able to have somebody tong down and pull out an oyster, crack it open, and slurp it up right then and there. And that, to me, is part of the heritage of this Chesapeake Bay. We can't afford to lose those things.
Do you want her? Wait, where's the eggs?
Catch them.
Can I hold her? Oh my God! She's like a spider. She's not like a crab at all.
You know, what is this? Oh, it's fiddler crab. It's male. You see how it has this big claw here?
What do fiddler crabs eat?
We prize our children, and I do not think that there's any of us in this society who would consciously say that we are going to deny you a pleasure that we have had as children.
Lord, look at that.
Oh my gosh. Why do they have silver on
The bay is a living thing and has organisms in it, but it is also something that can provide transportation, recreation. When you start talking about, why is it so important that the bay not be polluted, you're talking about the very basis of who can use the bay.
Hey, Tammy, I got one. All right.
Everyone can use it if it isn't polluted.
Anybody want to eat a grass shrimp?
Okay. No, not me.
You want to do it, Carl?
Yeah, you eat it first.
Oh, dear.
Ew. Is it good?
It tastes like shrimp.
It does, but it's not cooked.
The biological use is the most important because it's the one that does not preclude any other use necessarily. You see, we can have shipping on the bay and still preserve the biological integrity of it if we do it right. And we can develop along the Chesapeake Bay, but we have to make certain that the shoreline areas have adequate buffering. It's going to take a commitment, and it's going to take some money, yes. But let's go back to that money. Is it worth it? I think the public agrees that it is.
It's difficult for us as human beings to measure something as great as the Patuxent River simply and only by the dollar amount. There's a lot of value in preserving that for generations to come. What kind of a world are we living in if we permitted the devastation to continue that has now occurred in the Patuxent River?
We got a crab. All right.
If we go like we're going in another 50 years, there won't be any Chesapeake Bay.
"50 more years? Man has been living around the bay for 10,000 years.
All right. That's great. Where'd you get it? Back there. Oh, Yeah, see how it's chipped on the side? They shaped it along the sides. It's got that real pretty edge.
Across the bay and a few miles up the Patuxent, archaeologists have found evidence of an entire Indian village.
Is that a complete pot?
Well, it could be. We've got a rim up here, and it goes down to the base down here.
Pottery shards and arrowheads are scattered through mounds of discarded oyster shells. To the Indians, the bay seemed a vast, eternal provider. But there aren't many oysters in the Patuxent anymore. And for the shuckers at Denton's Oyster House, this was the last season. And what is over the horizon for the residents of Reedville? Perhaps we have learned our lesson in time. We're learning to see the bay as a vulnerable place, a place we need to care for. Oyster beds in the Patuxent, for example, are being replanted with young oysters from healthier parts of the bay. Hatcheries are replenishing certain fish stocks. More careful land use in places is improving the quality of water coming into the bay. We are the only residents of the bay who can shape its future. We must look beyond the horizon.
The rockfish showed in numbers untold, churning blue water to silver and gold. Down from the mountains to meet with the sea, 10,000 years we're in harmony beside you, gathering all that we could reach. We didn't see all the damage deep inside you. Now the sun is finally rising on the Chesapeake Horizons. All you rivers, shores, and sands, your future's lying in our hands. It is us that caused your plight. Now only we can make it right. We've got the chance today to save the Chesapeake Bay. Reaching out with fingers of sand, gentle sea lives within the land. Summer water puts a gleam in your eye. With ivory sails in a windy sky, we follow you. Taking for granted how long can you be living beside us faithfully, so tried and true. Now the sun is finally rising on the Chesapeake horizon. All you rivers, shores, and sands, future's lying in our hands. It is us that caused your plight. Now only we can make it right. We've got the chance today to save the Chesapeake Bay. We've got the chance today to save the Chesapeake Bay.